Now, you may not have heard of him, but a 56-year-old Australian could be the man who determines who's the next Prime Minister. Lynton Crosby is the strategist credited with giving Boris Johnson's mayoral campaigns discipline, direction and ultimately victory. Well, he's now been signed by the Conservatives, who hope he can deliver the majority they failed to achieve at the last election. In a minute, we'll hear the Mayor of London's verdict on his friend and former colleague. But first, a glimpse of the man behind the message. Lynton Crosby is the man David Cameron's counting on to win him the next election. He wields tremendous influence, but is rarely seen in public. And although no one can quite agree whether he's the Wizard of Oz or a master of the dark arts of spin, few doubt his effectiveness as a political strategist.
He's an A to B man, so he sees the goal and he goes straight for it.
Incredibly brutal and ruthless, yes.
Mr Crosby rose to fame as the man who masterminded 4 consecutive election victories for Australia's right-of-centre Prime Minister John Howard. But his campaigning techniques proved controversial when the Australian Prime Minister claimed Afghan immigrants on board a ship were throwing children into the sea to ensure they were rescued and granted asylum.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
The story was a myth, but it helped win Mr Howard a 3rd term. His record in Australia got him a job with another Howard, Michael Howard, who in 2005 was trying to bring the Conservatives back from the brink.
Well, he's very energetic, and the thing I really like about Lynton is that there's no fuss. It's straightforward. He's very straightforward. He's got one of those marvellous Australian traits. He sees it as it is, and I'm rather similar in that way. He's an A to B man, so he sees the goal and he goes straight for it.
Every week, every Friday during that campaign, he brought everybody from the Conservative Party campaign team, whatever level they were at, together. And it was the most motivational thing I've ever seen.
But his opponents say the techniques he imported from Australia were relentlessly negative. The harsh anti-immigration campaign didn't work magic here. The Conservative moneymen liked the discipline he instilled in the party, though, and drafted him in to bring a wayward candidate into line, Boris Johnson. It worked. The mayor won twice, and the party treasurer reflected that Mr Crosby had earned his keep.
I think I got him down for 125 for the whole thing.
125 for the re-electing Boris campaign?
For the whole first Boris campaign.
And was he worth that?
Oh, he's fantastic.
Even the man who lost to Boris Johnson hails Mr Crosby as one of the most formidable election strategists in the world. Formidable because he's ruthless.
Dog whistle politics and also the dead cat strategy. This idea that if the election is about an issue on which your candidate's weak, you smash a dead cat down in the middle of the table and everyone starts talking about the dead cat. And I mean, if you actually look at the way that worked in my second mayoral campaign against Boris, we were making very good headway. I'd pulled ahead on cutting the fares. And then immediately there's this question, I was a tax dodger, and that shifted the whole debate away from fares onto tax dodging.
Now, at the mayor's suggestion, Mr Crosby is returning to the political fray here once again, tasked with helping Mr Cameron win the next election.
I think he'll bring to the party the objectivity of an outsider. He will bring clarity about which messages to communicate.
Mr Crosby's reportedly talked about scraping the barnacles off the ship, but abandoning plans to introduce plain packaging for cigarettes and minimum alcohol pricing is worrying some of Mr Cameron's own MPs. They point out Mr Crosby has his own successful lobbying and communications company, which has in the past represented the tobacco and alcohol industry. Is there, they ask, a conflict of interest?
Of course, if you have somebody advising on strategy coming up to the election and then certain areas get dropped, clearly there's a concern. And I think there are also legitimate questions to be answered around whether or not it's possible to separate your role as a lobbyist and your role as a strategy advisor. And I think these are very important questions.
But obviously we've got no proof that Lynton Crosby has been responsible for dropping those policies. But what makes you suspect in terms of his company portfolio?
Well, I think that's the point, is that I'd like to know exactly what is it currently in his portfolio.
Those questions have been given greater urgency by the latest lobbying scandal, where MPs and peers were offered cash by lobbyists to ask parliamentary questions. The Prime Minister rebuffed questions about his advisor in Parliament last week.
Have you ever had any discussions with Lynton Crosby about the standard packaging of cigarettes or the minimum price of a unit of alcohol?
I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that Lynton Crosby has never lobbied me on anything.
Without knowing who his clients are, though, it's impossible to know if Mr. Crosby is using his position at the heart of government to further his lobbying interests. Mr. Crosby's company motto is research, strategy, results. The last time he masterminded a Tory general election campaign, Labour won a 66-seat majority. This time, his research and strategy has to yield results. The Conservatives' first outright victory in more than 20 years.